Charles Thompson stood in front of his bathroom mirror at 3 in the morning. The fluorescent light above buzzed like an angry bee, casting harsh shadows across his face. Dark circles hung under his eyes like bruises, and his usually neat brown hair stuck up in different directions. He had not slept properly in weeks. The apartment around him felt like a tomb. Empty pizza boxes sat on the kitchen counter next to unwashed dishes that had been there for days. The living room couch still held the indent where his wife, Sarah, used to sit every evening, reading her romance novels while he watched the news. That indent had become a monument to everything he had lost. 3 months ago, his life had been completely different. He had been a successful marketing manager at a tech company in downtown Chicago. Sarah had been planning their 10-year anniversary party. His teenage daughter, Emma, had been applying to colleges, excited about her future. His elderly mother had called him every Sunday to chat about her garden and ask when he would visit again. Now all of that was gone. Charles splashed cold water on his face and looked up at his reflection again. The man staring back at him looked like a stranger. This was not the confident businessman who used to give presentations to rooms full of executives. This was not the loving husband who used to surprise Sarah with flowers on random Tuesdays. This was not the proud father who had coached Emma's soccer team for 3 years. "I've lost everyone," he whispered to his reflection. His voice cracked on the words. The trouble had started 6 months earlier, though Charles had been too proud to see the warning signs. His company had been going through changes. New management had come in with fresh ideas about efficiency and cost-cutting. Charles had been with the company for 8 years and assumed his position was safe. He had trained half the younger employees and had consistently received good performance reviews. But assumptions, Charles learned, could be dangerous things. The first sign of trouble came during a team meeting in March. His new boss, Jennifer Walsh, had introduced a restructuring plan that would combine several departments. Charles had raised concerns about how the changes might affect their biggest client accounts. He had spoken up because he cared about the company and wanted to help them avoid problems. Jennifer had not appreciated his input. She had smiled coldly and suggested that perhaps Charles was resistant to change. The room had gone quiet, and Charles had felt the eyes of his colleagues on him. He had tried to explain that he was not against change, just concerned about implementation. But Jennifer had already moved on to the next topic. After the meeting, Charles had approached Jennifer privately. He had wanted to clarify his position and show that he was a team player. Jennifer had been polite, but distant. She had told him that she appreciated his dedication, but felt that fresh perspectives were needed for the department's future. Charles had left that conversation with a knot in his stomach. He had gone home that night and told Sarah about it over dinner. Sarah had reassured him that he was valuable to the company and that things would work out. Emma had been at the table doing homework while eating, occasionally joining their conversation with teenage observations about workplace drama. "Dad, maybe she's just trying to prove herself as the new boss," Emma had said, looking up from her math problems. "My history teacher was like that at the start of the year. Super strict and weird, but now she's actually pretty cool." Charles had smiled at his daughter's attempt to help. Emma had always been wise for her age, able to see situations from different angles. He had reached over and ruffled her hair, something that used to annoy her when she was younger, but that she now tolerated with good humor. "Thanks, kiddo. You're probably right." But Emma had not been right this time. Over the next few weeks, Charles had noticed subtle changes in how he was treated at work. He was excluded from certain meetings that he would normally attend. Projects he had been leading were reassigned to other team members without explanation. When he asked Jennifer about it, she gave vague answers about redistributing workload and developing other employees. Charles had started working longer hours, trying to prove his value to the company. He stayed late finishing reports and came in early to prepare for presentations. He volunteered for extra projects and offered to help train new employees. But instead of improving his situation, his efforts seemed to make things worse. His colleagues began avoiding him. People who had been friendly before now gave him polite nods in the hallway instead of stopping to chat. He overheard whispered conversations that stopped when he approached. The office atmosphere around him became tense and uncomfortable. Sarah had noticed the change in him. She had asked him several times if everything was okay at work, and Charles had tried to reassure her that it was just a busy period. He had not wanted to worry her unnecessarily. Sarah had her own stresses as a nurse at the local hospital, dealing with difficult patients and long shifts. The last thing she needed was to worry about his job, too. But hiding his stress from Sarah had been harder than Charles expected. He had started snapping at small things that never bothered him before. When Emma left her dishes in the sink, he would lecture her about responsibility. When Sarah forgot to pick up his dry cleaning, he would make passive-aggressive comments about planning ahead. His family had started walking on eggshells around him, though Charles had been too absorbed in his work problems to fully realize it at the time. The end came suddenly, like a car accident that you see coming but cannot avoid. On a Friday morning in May, Jennifer had called Charles into her office. He had assumed it was for another uncomfortable conversation about his attitude or performance. Instead, she had informed him that his position was being eliminated as part of the restructuring. Charles had sat in the uncomfortable chair across from Jennifer's desk, feeling like the world was tilting sideways. She had explained about severance packages and transition timelines, but her words had sounded like they were coming from underwater. All he could think about was how he was going to tell Sarah and Emma. "This is nothing personal, Charles," Jennifer had said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "It's just business." Charles had nodded and asked appropriate questions about final paperwork and cleaning out his desk. He had maintained his composure until he was alone in his office, packing 8 years of his life into cardboard boxes. Then he had sat down in his chair and stared at his computer screen, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. He had called Sarah from his cell phone in the parking lot after loading his boxes into his car. She had been at work and could only talk for a minute, but he had told her he needed to discuss something important when she got home. Sarah had immediately picked up on the serious tone in his voice. "Charles, what's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he had lied. "We'll talk tonight." That evening had been one of the worst of Charles's life. He had waited until after dinner to break the news, hoping to give his family one last normal meal together before everything changed. Emma had been telling them about her English class and how she had gotten an A on her essay about symbolism in literature. Sarah had been describing a difficult case at the hospital where she had helped save a young man's life after a motorcycle accident. Charles had listened to their stories and felt like he was watching them from behind glass. They had seemed so happy and confident in their lives, and he was about to shatter that peace. "I have something I need to tell you both," he had finally said. The words had come out in a rush. He had explained about being laid off, about the severance package, about how he would start looking for a new job right away. He had tried to sound confident and optimistic, but his voice had betrayed him. Sarah had reached across the table and taken his hand. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. But you know what? This might be a good thing. You haven't been happy there for months. Now you can find something better." Emma had been quieter, processing the news with the seriousness that sometimes surprised him in his teenage daughter. "Does this mean I can't go to State University?" she had asked. Charles had felt his heart break a little. Emma had been talking about State University for 2 years. It was her dream school, but it was also expensive. "Let's not worry about that right now," he had said. "I'll find another job soon." But finding another job had proven much more difficult than Charles had anticipated. The first few weeks after losing his job had actually been somewhat pleasant. Charles had treated it like a vacation, sleeping in and spending time on projects around the house that he had been putting off. He had fixed the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom, painted the fence in the backyard, and organized the garage. Sarah had joked that maybe unemployment would turn him into a handyman. Charles had started his job search with confidence. He had 8 years of experience, good performance reviews from his previous positions, and a solid network of professional contacts. He had updated his resume, created profiles on job search websites, and started reaching out to people in his industry. The first red flag had come when he tried to get a reference from his former company. Jennifer had refused to speak with him directly, instead referring all inquiries to human resources. The HR department had provided only basic information about his employment dates and position title. They had declined to comment on his performance or the reasons for his termination. Charles had realized that Jennifer was probably giving negative references when potential employers called for information. Without being able to prove it, he was trapped in a situation where his former boss could sabotage his job prospects while hiding behind corporate policies. His network of professional contacts had been less helpful than expected. Many of his former colleagues seemed uncomfortable discussing job opportunities with him. Some did not return his calls at all. Others gave vague promises about keeping an eye out for openings, but never followed up with concrete leads. Charles had started to understand that being laid off carried a stigma in his industry. Regardless of the official reasons, people assumed that fired employees must have done something wrong. It was easier to hire someone who was currently employed or who had left their previous job voluntarily. As weeks turned into months, Charles had become increasingly desperate. He had started applying for positions below his experience level, hoping that any job was better than no job. He had been willing to take a significant pay cut just to get back into the workforce. But even lower-level positions had rejected his applications, often citing concerns about overqualification or salary expectations. The financial pressure had started building slowly, then accelerated like a snowball rolling downhill. Charles's severance package had provided some cushion, but it was not designed to support a family indefinitely. Sarah's nursing salary covered some of their expenses, but not enough to maintain their lifestyle without his income. They had started making small sacrifices first, eating out less frequently, canceling the premium cable package, shopping at discount grocery stores instead of their usual supermarket. Charles had told himself these were temporary adjustments that would end as soon as he found new employment. But as his job search stretched on, the sacrifices had become larger and more painful. They had canceled their family vacation to the beach that summer. Emma had given up her expensive soccer league to play on a cheaper recreational team. Sarah had started working extra shifts at the hospital to bring in additional income. Charles had watched his family adjust their lives around his failure to find work, and the guilt had eaten away at him like acid. He had been a primary breadwinner for their family, the one who had always taken pride in providing for his wife and daughter. Now he felt like a burden rather than a protector. The stress had begun affecting his relationship with Sarah in ways he had not anticipated. Money disagreements that they had never had before became frequent sources of tension. Sarah had wanted to discuss long-term financial planning and potential lifestyle changes. Charles had resisted these conversations, insisting that his unemployment was temporary and that they should not make drastic decisions based on a short-term setback. Their different approaches to the crisis had created distance between them. Sarah had wanted to face their problems head-on and work together to find solutions. Charles had wanted to maintain the illusion that everything would return to normal soon. This fundamental disagreement had poisoned their daily interactions, turning simple conversations about household expenses into arguments about their future. Emma had been caught in the middle of their growing tension. She had tried to help by getting a part-time job at a local restaurant, but Charles had initially refused to let her work during the school year. He had not wanted his daughter to sacrifice her education because of his problems. Eventually, though, the financial pressure had forced him to agree to let Emma work limited hours on weekends. Watching his teenage daughter come home tired from serving tables to help pay for her own school supplies had been one of the lowest points in Charles's life up to that moment. The breaking point in his marriage had come during an argument about Emma's college plans. It had been late September, and Emma had been working on her applications for early admission to several universities. The application fees alone were costing hundreds of dollars that they could not easily afford. Sarah had suggested that Emma should focus on schools with lower tuition costs or consider starting at a community college and transferring later. Charles had exploded at the suggestion, accusing Sarah of giving up on their daughter's dreams. Sarah had fired back that someone in their family needed to be realistic about their financial situation. "You've been unemployed for 5 months, Charles," Sarah had said. "We can't keep pretending that you're going to find a job tomorrow that pays the same as your old one. We need to make plans based on our actual circumstances, not on what we wish was happening. Charles had felt attacked and defensive. So you think I should just give up? Accept that we're failures and settle for less? I think you should accept that things have changed and that we need to adapt. I'm not saying give up on looking for a job. I'm saying we need to be smart about how we handle our money while you're looking. The argument had escalated from there, with both of them saying things they regretted. Emma had heard them fighting from her bedroom and had come downstairs in tears, begging them to stop. Seeing his daughter upset had snapped Charles out of his anger, but the damage to his marriage had already been done. After that fight, Sarah had started sleeping in the guest bedroom. They had told Emma it was because Charles's job search activities were keeping him up late, and they did not want to disturb each other's sleep. But Charles had known that Sarah was pulling away from him emotionally as well as physically. The final blow to his marriage had come in November, just 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Now, standing in his empty apartment in the middle of the night, Charles could still remember every detail of that terrible day. Sarah had asked him to sit down at the kitchen table after Emma had left for school. She had looked exhausted, like she had not slept in days. "Charles, I can't do this anymore," she had said simply. He had known immediately what she meant, but he had pretended not to understand. "Can't do what?" "This. Us. I can't live with someone who has given up on himself and is taking the rest of us down with him." Charles had tried to argue, to explain that he was still looking for work, that things would get better. But Sarah had cut him off. "You stopped looking for a job weeks ago. You spend all day on the couch watching television or sleeping. You snap at Emma over nothing. You blame me for every suggestion I make about her finances. You've turned into someone I don't recognize, and I can't watch you destroy yourself anymore." The conversation that followed had been painful, but brief. Sarah had already made her decision. She had spoken to a lawyer and found an apartment across town that she could afford on her nursing salary. She would take Emma with her, though Emma would be able to visit Charles whenever she wanted. Charles had begged her to reconsider, to give him more time, to try counseling. But Sarah had been firm in her decision. She had reached her limit and was protecting herself and Emma from the toxic environment their home had become. "I still love you," she had said with tears in her eyes, "but I can't live with who you've become. If you get help and figure out how to deal with your problems in a healthy way, maybe we can talk about the future. But right now, I need to think about Emma and myself." Within 2 weeks, Sarah and Emma had moved out of the house they had shared for 7 years. Charles had been left alone with mortgage payments he could not afford and the echoing silence of rooms that had once been filled with family life. He had managed to keep the house for another month before finally accepting reality. The mortgage company had been understanding about his situation, but could only offer limited forbearance options. Without steady income, Charles had no choice but to put the house on the market and find cheaper housing. The apartment he was living in now was a one-bedroom place in a building that had seen better days. It cost less than half what his mortgage payment had been, but it felt like living in a cardboard box compared to the home he had shared with his family. The walls were thin, the neighbors were loud, and the heating system worked sporadically. Charles had sold most of his furniture because it would not fit in the small space. He had kept only the essentials: a bed, a small table, one chair, and a television that he watched obsessively to drown out the silence. The rest of his possessions were in storage, waiting for a day when he might have a real home again. His relationship with Emma had suffered tremendously through the separation. She visited him every other weekend, but the visits were awkward and painful. Emma clearly missed their old life and had trouble understanding why everything had fallen apart. She was angry with Charles for not being able to keep their family together, though she tried not to show it. During their visits, they would go to movies or out to eat at cheap restaurants, but conversation was difficult. Emma would tell him about school and her friends, but Charles could see that she was editing herself, avoiding topics that might upset him. She no longer talked about college plans or her dreams for the future. Instead, their conversation stayed focused on safe, immediate topics that carried no emotional weight. Charles knew he was failing as a father as well as a husband, but he felt powerless to change anything. Depression had settled over him like a heavy blanket, making it difficult to care about job searching or maintaining relationships. He went through the motions of daily life without any real engagement or hope. His mother had stopped calling after several conversations where Charles had been short-tempered and dismissive. She had tried to offer support and advice, but Charles had interpreted her help as criticism. During their last phone call, she had suggested that he might benefit from talking to a counselor about his situation. Charles had reacted angrily, telling her that he did not need therapy and that he could handle his own problems. "I raised you to be stronger than this," his mother had said sadly before hanging up. Charles had not spoken to her since that conversation 2 months ago. He knew she was probably hurt and worried about him, but he felt too ashamed to call and apologize. Every person he had lost felt like another piece of evidence that he was a failure as a man, a husband, a father, and a son. Standing in his bathroom at 3 in the morning, Charles stared at his reflection and tried to remember who he used to be. The confident, successful man he had been seemed like a character from a movie he had watched long ago. That person felt fictional now, impossible to reclaim. "I've lost everyone," he whispered again, and this time the words felt like a confession rather than a complaint. The truth was that Charles knew he had played a role in driving people away. His pride, his refusal to accept help, his anger at circumstances beyond his control. All of these had contributed to his isolation. But knowing that he was partially responsible for his situation only made him feel worse, not better. Charles turned off the bathroom light and walked back to his bed. The apartment felt like a prison cell, small and depressing and cut off from the world. He lay down on a mattress that sat directly on the floor because he could not afford a bed frame. The ceiling above him had a water stain in the shape of a cloud, and he stared at it while thinking about how completely his life had collapsed. 6 months ago, he had been planning an anniversary celebration with his wife. Now he was alone in a studio apartment, unemployed and estranged from everyone he loved. The speed of his fall from success to failure still amazed him. It proved how fragile the foundations of a life could be, how quickly everything that seemed permanent could disappear. Tomorrow would bring another day of the same routine. Half-hearted job searching, daytime television, cheap takeout food, and the crushing weight of his own regrets. Charles closed his eyes and tried not to think about the future, because the future looked like more of the same loneliness and failure stretching out indefinitely. But sleep would not come easily. It never did anymore. Instead, he lay awake replaying conversations with Sarah, remembering Emma's laughter from better days, and wondering if there was any way back from the hole he had dug for himself. The man in the mirror had been right. He had lost everyone. And as the night stretched on toward dawn, Charles began to wonder if he had lost himself as well. Charles woke up the next morning with his neck stiff from sleeping on the floor. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of his studio apartment, highlighting the dust particles floating in the air. For a moment, he forgot where he was and expected to see Sarah's side of their old bed. Reality crashed back quickly, accompanied by the familiar weight of dread that had become his constant companion. The digital clock on his phone showed 11:47 a.m. He had slept later than intended, though it hardly mattered since he had nowhere important to be. Charles sat up slowly, his back protesting against the uncomfortable sleeping surface. The apartment smelled like old takeout and neglect, a combination that had stopped bothering him weeks ago. He shuffled to the small kitchenette and opened the refrigerator, finding only a carton of milk that was probably expired and some leftover Chinese food from 3 days ago. His stomach growled, but the idea of eating made him feel slightly sick. Depression had stolen his appetite along with everything else, leaving him surviving on coffee and whatever required the least effort to prepare. Charles made instant coffee with tap water heated in the microwave, a ritual that would have horrified his old self. The man he used to be had owned an expensive espresso machine and ground his own beans every morning. That machine was probably sitting in Sarah's new kitchen now, part of the life he was no longer invited to share. While the water heated, he checked his phone for messages. No missed calls, no text messages, no emails except for spam and job rejection letters. The silence felt heavier than usual, emphasizing just how completely he had been cut off from the world of human connection. He opened his laptop and stared at the job search websites he had bookmarked. The same positions he had looked at yesterday were still posted, still requiring qualifications he possessed, but somehow could not convince anyone he was worth hiring. Charles clicked through several listings without really reading them, going through the motions of looking for work without any real hope or enthusiasm. The sound of laughter came through the thin wall that separated his apartment from his neighbor's unit. A woman's voice, light and carefree, followed by a man's deeper chuckle. Charles felt a stab of jealousy, so sharp it surprised him. He had forgotten what it felt like to laugh with another person, to share moments of simple joy with someone who cared about you. Charles closed the laptop without applying for any jobs. What was the point? He had been rejected for dozens of positions already, and each rejection email felt like another confirmation that he was worthless. The hiring managers who bothered to respond at all usually cited concerns about his employment gap or the mysterious better fit for other candidates. That seemed to mean they could sense his desperation through his cover letters. He spent the rest of the morning watching daytime television, flipping between talk shows and old movies without really paying attention to any of them. The noise helped fill the silence of his apartment, but it could not fill the emptiness inside him. Charles found himself thinking about his old office, wondering if anyone there ever mentioned his name or noticed that the projects he used to manage were being handled differently. Around 2 in the afternoon, his phone rang. For a moment, his heart jumped with the possibility that it might be Sarah or Emma calling to say they missed him. Instead, the caller ID showed his mother's number. Charles stared at the phone for several rings, debating whether to answer. He had not spoken to his mother since their argument 2 months ago, and the guilt of avoiding her calls had been eating at him. Finally, he answered. Mom. Charles. His mother's voice sounded surprised, as if she had not expected him to pick up. Oh, honey, I'm so glad you answered. I've been worried sick about you. I'm fine, Charles said automatically, the same lie he had been telling everyone for months. You don't sound fine. You sound tired. Are you eating enough? Are you taking care of yourself? The genuine concern in his mother's voice made Charles's chest tighten with emotion he had been suppressing. Margaret Thompson was 73 years old and lived alone in the house where Charles had grown up. She had been widowed 5 years earlier when Charles's father had died of a heart attack, but she had maintained her independence and her spirit despite the loss. Mom, I told you I'm fine. You don't need to worry about me. Charles, you're my son. I'm going to worry about you until the day I die. That's what mothers do. She paused for a moment. I heard about you. And Sarah? Charles felt his stomach drop. Who told you? Sarah called me last month. She was crying and said she wanted me to know what was happening. She still loves you, you know. She's just scared and hurt and doesn't know how to help you anymore. Charles had not known that Sarah had been in contact with his mother. The idea that they had discussed his situation behind his back made him feel exposed and ashamed. What did she tell you? She told me that you lost your job and that you've been struggling with depression. She said you won't talk to anyone or accept help from people who care about you. She's worried that you're going to do something to hurt yourself. I'm not going to hurt myself, Charles said quickly, though the thought had crossed his mind more than once during his darkest moments. Good. But, Charles, honey, you need to talk to someone about what you're going through. This isn't something you can handle all by yourself. Charles felt the familiar surge of defensive anger rising in his chest. I don't need therapy, Mom. I need a job. I need my family back. I need my life back. Talking to some stranger about my feelings isn't going to fix any of that. Maybe not, his mother said gently. But it might help you figure out how to start fixing things. You can't get your life back by hiding in that apartment and pushing everyone away. I'm not pushing anyone away. Everyone left me. Charles Daniel Thompson. His mother's voice took on the firm tone she had used when he was a child and needed correction. You know that's not true. Sarah didn't leave because she stopped loving you. She left because she couldn't watch you destroy yourself anymore. Emma didn't choose to live with her mother because she doesn't want to see you. She chose it because your home became a place full of anger and sadness. Charles felt tears burning behind his eyes. His mother's words hit him like physical blows because they contained truth he had been avoiding. "I don't know how to fix it," he whispered. "Oh, sweetheart." His mother's voice became soft and loving again. "You start by admitting that you need help. You start by taking one small step toward taking care of yourself. You start by remembering that you're worth fighting for." Charles sat in silence for several minutes, holding the phone against his ear and listening to his mother's quiet breathing. He wanted to believe what she was saying, but it felt impossible. The man he used to be seemed like a character from someone else's life. "I miss Dad," he said finally. "I know you do, honey. I miss him too, every single day. But you know what your father would tell you if he were here?" Charles shook his head, even though his mother could not see him. "He would tell you that falling down doesn't make you a failure. Staying down does. He would tell you that being a man isn't about never needing help. It's about being brave enough to ask for help when you need it." Charles's father had been a construction worker who had built a small contracting business from nothing. He had been the kind of man who could fix anything with his hands and who had taught Charles that hard work and determination could overcome any obstacle. Charles had always tried to live up to his father's example, but now he felt like he had disappointed his father's memory. "I don't know if I'm brave enough anymore, Mom." "You are. You're my son and your father's son. You have strength you haven't even discovered yet, but you have to be willing to use it." After they hung up, Charles sat on a single chair and stared out the window at the parking lot below. His mother's words echoed in his mind, competing with the voice of self-doubt that had been his dominant internal conversation for months. Part of him wanted to believe that he could turn things around, but a larger part of him felt like it was too late to salvage anything from the wreckage of his life. That evening, Charles did something he had not done in months. He cleaned his apartment. It was not a deep cleaning, but he threw away the accumulated takeout containers, washed the dishes that had been sitting in the sink, and made his bed properly. The physical activity felt good after weeks of inactivity, and the improved environment made the space feel slightly less depressing. While he was cleaning, he found a photo that had fallen behind his small dresser. It was a picture from Emma's 16th birthday party 6 months ago, back when his family had still been intact. In the photo, Charles had his arm around Sarah while Emma blew out the candles on her cake. All three of them were smiling, completely unaware that their lives were about to fall apart. Looking at the photo, Charles tried to remember what it felt like to be the man in the picture. That Charles had believed in his own competence and worth. He had felt confident about his ability to provide for his family and handle whatever challenges life presented. He had been proud of his marriage, his daughter, his career, and his place in the world. Charles set the photo on his dresser where he could see it. It hurt to look at, but it also reminded him that he had been capable of happiness once. If he had been that man before, maybe he could become him again. The next morning, Charles forced himself to get up earlier than usual. He showered and shaved for the first time in a week, put on clean clothes, and made a real effort to look presentable. Then he walked to the coffee shop 3 blocks from his apartment, something he had been meaning to do for weeks but had never found the motivation to attempt. The coffee shop was busier than he had expected for a Tuesday morning. Business people in suits grabbed quick cups on their way to offices Charles no longer had access to. Students with laptops worked on assignments while surrounded by textbooks and empty cups. Elderly couples shared newspapers and quiet conversation over breakfast pastries. Charles ordered a regular coffee and found a small table by the window. For the first time in months, he was surrounded by people living normal lives, and it felt both comforting and alienating. Everyone else seemed to have places to go and purposes to fulfill, while he was just killing time until he could return to his empty apartment. But being around other people also reminded him that the world continued to function despite his personal crisis. People were working, studying, falling in love, raising children, and pursuing dreams. Life went on, with or without his participation. Charles opened his laptop and began looking at job postings with more focus than he had managed in weeks. Instead of skimming through listings while distracted by television, he read each description carefully and considered whether he was actually qualified for the position. He took notes about companies that interested him and researched their backgrounds and recent news. For the first time since losing his job, Charles began to approach his search strategically rather than desperately. He identified 5 positions that seemed like good fits for his skills and experience, then spent time crafting individual cover letters for each application rather than using the generic template he had been sending everywhere. The work took most of the morning, but it felt productive in a way Charles had forgotten was possible. When he finished, he had submitted 5 applications and created a plan for following up with each company. It was not much, but it was more progress than he had made in weeks. As he was preparing to leave the coffee shop, a woman at the next table looked over at him. She appeared to be in her 50s, with gray-streaked brown hair and kind eyes behind stylish glasses. "I'm sorry for eavesdropping," she said with a smile, "but I couldn't help noticing you working so hard on job applications. Are you looking for work in marketing?" Charles nodded, surprised by the interaction. He had become so used to avoiding human contact that being addressed by a stranger felt jarring. "I'm Gloria Martinez. I run a small nonprofit here in town that helps people transition back into the workforce after periods of unemployment. We offer resume workshops, interview practice, and networking events. You might find our services helpful." Gloria handed him a business card for an organization called Fresh Start Career Services. Charles looked at the card skeptically. He had tried several job placement services already, and most of them had been more interested in collecting fees than actually helping him find work. "Don't worry," Gloria said, reading his expression accurately. "We're completely free. We're funded by grants and donations, not by charging people who are already struggling financially." Charles thanked her for the information and put the card in his pocket. After she left, he sat for a few more minutes thinking about their brief conversation. Gloria had spoken to him like a normal person, without the mixture of pity and discomfort he had grown used to seeing in people's faces when they learned about his situation. Walking home from the coffee shop, Charles felt something he had not experienced in months, a small spark of hope. It was fragile and easily extinguishable, but it was there. His mother's words echoed in his mind. You start by taking one small step toward taking care of yourself. Applying for jobs seriously and talking to Gloria felt like small steps. They were not dramatic changes, and they did not solve any of his major problems. But they were movements in a positive direction after months of standing still or sliding backward. That afternoon, Charles called the number on Gloria's business card. A receptionist scheduled him for an appointment the following Thursday for a consultation about their services. Charles wrote the appointment time in his phone calendar, the first future commitment he had made in weeks. He also did something that scared him. He called Emma. His daughter answered on the 3rd ring. "Dat. So what first? How was school today?" "It was okay. We had a pop quiz in chemistry that I wasn't ready for, but I think I did all right." Emma's voice sounded cautious, like she was not sure what to expect from this call. "I'm sure you did fine. You're smart, just like your mother." They talked for 20 minutes about school, her job at the restaurant, and a movie she wanted to see with her friends. Charles forced himself to ask questions and listen to her answers instead of letting the conversation drift into awkward silence. For brief moments, their interaction felt almost normal. "Dad," Emma said as their conversation was winding down. "Yeah. Are you doing okay? You sound different today." "Better, I think." Charles felt his chest tighten with emotion. His daughter's concern reminded him that people still cared about him, even though he had been pushing them away. "I'm trying to do better, kiddo. I miss you and your mom a lot." "We miss you too. Mom still cries sometimes when she thinks I'm not paying attention." Charles closed his eyes, picturing Sarah crying over their broken marriage. He had been so focused on his own pain that he had not fully considered how much Sarah was hurting too. She had lost her marriage, and her financial security just as he had. The difference was that she had been forced to hold everything together for Emma's sake while he had been falling apart. Emma, I want you to know that none of this is your fault. The problems your mom and I are having don't have anything to do with you. I know, Dad, but I still wish things could go back to the way they used to be. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. That night, Charles slept better than he had in weeks. He still woke up several times, but the darkness felt less suffocating than usual. The photo of his family on the dresser caught the light from the street lamp outside his window, reminding him of what he was fighting to recover. The next few days followed a similar pattern. Charles maintained basic hygiene and tidiness in his apartment. He spent mornings at the coffee shop working on job applications and research. He called Emma every other day and had brief but meaningful conversations with her. He even called his mother back and apologized for avoiding her calls. "I'm proud of you for reaching out," his mother told him. "It takes courage to admit when you need support." Charles was not sure if what he was doing counted as courage, but it felt like progress. The changes were small and fragile, but they were real. For the first time since losing his job, he was taking active steps to improve his situation instead of passively waiting for circumstances to change. On Thursday, Charles kept his appointment with Fresh Start Career Services. Gloria met with him personally in a small office decorated with motivational posters and thank you letters from former clients. She reviewed his resume and gave him practical advice about how to address his employment gap in cover letters and interviews. "The key is to be honest about your situation without dwelling on the negative aspects," Gloria explained. "You've been using this time to reassess your career goals and develop new skills. You're not desperate for any job. You're looking for the right opportunity to re-engage with your profession." Gloria also connected Charles with a support group for unemployed professionals that met every Tuesday evening. Charles was reluctant to join at first, worried about having to share his personal struggles with strangers. But Gloria assured him that he could attend as an observer until he felt comfortable participating. "Everyone in that room understands what you're going through," she said. "Sometimes it helps just to know you're not alone." Charles left the appointment with several new resources and strategies for his job search. More importantly, he left with the feeling that someone believed he could succeed. Gloria had spoken to him like he was a capable professional going through a temporary setback, not like he was a failure who needed charity. That weekend, Emma came to visit for the first time in a month. Charles had been nervous about seeing her in his depressing apartment, but he had cleaned thoroughly and bought groceries to cook a real meal. When Emma arrived Saturday afternoon, she looked around the small space with curious eyes. "It's not very big," she observed. "No, it's not, but it's clean and it's home for now." Charles had planned activities they could do together within his limited budget. They walked to a nearby park and fed ducks at a pond. They visited the public library and checked out books together, something they had done when Emma was younger, but had stopped as she became more independent. They cooked dinner together in his tiny kitchen, making pasta and salad while talking about Emma's college applications. "I've been thinking about what you said before, about maybe starting a community college," Emma said while they ate. Charles felt a pang of guilt. Emma was adjusting her dreams to accommodate his failure to provide for their family. "Sweetheart, I don't want you to limit your options because of our current situation. I'm not limiting them. I'm just being practical. I can get my general education requirements done for a lot less money, then transfer to a 4-year school for my major. Lots of successful people start at community college." Charles looked at his daughter with pride and sadness. She was being mature and realistic about their circumstances in a way that he had not been able to manage for months. Emma was handling their family crisis with more grace than he had shown. "You're pretty wise for 17, he told her. "I get it from my parents. Well, from Mom mostly, but you used to be pretty smart too." Charles laughed for the first time in months. Emma's gentle teasing felt like forgiveness and hope wrapped together. That night, after Emma had returned to Sarah's apartment, Charles sat in his chair and reflected on the weekend. Seeing his daughter had reminded him of what he was working toward. He was not just trying to find a job or get his life back on track for his own sake. He was trying to become the kind of father Emma deserved again, the kind of man who could provide for his family and be a partner Sarah could depend on. Charles picked up the photo from his dresser and studied the faces of his family. The man in the picture looked confident and happy, surrounded by people who loved him. Charles wanted to be that man again, not just for appearances, but genuinely. He wanted to feel proud of himself again, to believe that he had something valuable to offer the world. It would not be easy, and there were no guarantees that he could repair the damage that had been done to his relationships. But for the first time since losing his job, Charles believed it might be possible. The road back to himself would be long and difficult, but he was finally ready to start walking. 3 weeks after his visit with Emma, Charles received a phone call that changed everything. He had been at the coffee shop working on applications when his phone rang, displaying a number he did not recognize. Normally, he would have let unknown callers go to voicemail, but something made him answer. "Hello, this is Charles Thompson." "Mr. Thompson, this is Rebecca Chun from Midwest Marketing Solutions. I'm calling about the application you submitted for our senior marketing coordinator position." Charles's heart began beating faster. He had applied to Midwest Marketing Solutions 2 weeks earlier, but had not heard anything back. Most companies did not bother to call candidates they were rejecting. "Yes, I remember the application," Charles said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'd like to schedule a phone interview with you, if you're still interested in the position. Are you available this Friday afternoon?" Charles quickly agreed to the interview time, then spent the rest of the week preparing more thoroughly than he had for any job interview in his life. He researched the company extensively, prepared answers to common interview questions, and practiced his responses out loud until they sounded natural. Gloria from Fresh Start Career Services offered to conduct a mock interview with him, which helped him identify areas where he needed to improve his presentation. The phone interview went better than Charles had dared to hope. Rebecca Chun was professional, but friendly, and she seemed genuinely interested in his background and experience. Charles managed to discuss his employment gap honestly without sounding defensive or bitter. He had taken Gloria's advice and framed his time off as an opportunity to reassess his career direction and focus on personal growth. "We've had a lot of applicants for this position," Rebecca told him at the end of the interview. "But your experience with client relationship management is exactly what we're looking for. I'd like to invite you for an in-person interview next Tuesday. Would that work for you?" Charles agreed immediately, then spent the weekend in a state of nervous excitement he had not felt in months. He bought a new shirt and tie for the interview, the first clothes he had purchased since losing his job. Standing in the department store dressing room, he barely recognized the man looking back at him in the mirror. This person looked professional and confident, nothing like the depressed, disheveled man who had been hiding in his apartment for months. The in-person interview took place at Midwest Marketing Solutions' downtown office, a mid-sized company that specialized in marketing campaigns for local businesses. Charles arrived 15 minutes early and spent the time in his car reviewing his notes and practicing deep breathing exercises to calm his nerves. The interview panel consisted of Rebecca Chun and 2 other managers. They asked detailed questions about his previous work experience, his approach to client management, and how he would handle various hypothetical scenarios. Charles found himself relaxing as the conversation progressed. For the first time in months, he was talking about work he understood and enjoyed. "Mr. Thompson," said one of the managers, "I have to ask about the gap in your employment. Can you tell us what you've been doing for the past 7 months?" Charles had prepared for this question extensively. "I was laid off from my previous position due to company restructuring. I initially focused on finding a position similar to my previous role, but I realized that this transition period was also an opportunity to evaluate what I really wanted from my career. I've used this time to update my skills, network with other professionals, and think carefully about the kind of organization I want to work with long-term." The managers nodded and asked follow-up questions about his current skill level and his interest in their company specifically. Charles answered confidently, drawing on the research he had done and the genuine enthusiasm he felt about potentially joining their team. "We should have a decision by Friday," Rebecca told him as the interview concluded. Thank you for your time today. You've given us a lot to think about. Charles left the interview feeling cautiously optimistic. He had presented himself well and had good rapport with the interviewers. The position seemed like a good fit for his skills, and the company appeared to have a positive work environment. But he tried not to get his hopes up too high. He had learned that disappointment was easier to handle when you expected it. That evening, Charles called Emma to tell her about the interview. She was working at the restaurant, but had a few minutes to talk during her break. "Dad, that's awesome. How do you think it went?" "I think it went well, but you never know. I won't hear anything until Friday. I have a good feeling about this one. You sound more like yourself when you talk about work stuff." Charles smiled at his daughter's observation. It was true that discussing marketing strategy and client management felt natural in a way that nothing else had for months. The interview had reminded him that he was good at his job, that he had valuable skills and experience that employers needed. "Emma, I want you to know that regardless of what happens with this job, I'm proud of how you've handled everything that's been going on with our family. You've been more mature about this situation than I have." "Thanks, Dad. But you're getting better." "Mom thinks so, too." Charles was surprised by this comment. "You and your mom talk about me?" "Sometimes. She still cares about you a lot. She asks how you're doing when I come back from visiting you. I think she's hopeful that you're starting to figure things out." After they hung up, Charles found himself thinking about Sarah for the first time in weeks without feeling completely hopeless. Maybe if he could get his life back on track, there might be a chance to repair their relationship. He was not naive enough to think that getting a job would automatically fix their marriage, but it would be a start toward becoming the man Sarah had fallen in love with. Friday afternoon arrived with agonizing slowness. Charles spent the morning at the coffee shop, but he was too nervous to focus on job applications. He kept checking his phone every few minutes, even though Rebecca had said they would call with their decision. At 3:30 p.m., his phone rang. Rebecca Chin's number appeared on the screen. "Hello, this is Charles." "Hi, Charles, this is Rebecca. I'm calling with good news. We'd like to offer you the senior marketing coordinator position. Are you still interested?" Charles felt his knees go weak. "Yes, absolutely. I'm very interested." Rebecca explained the details of the offer. The salary was about 15% less than his previous job, but it was still enough to support himself and contribute meaningfully to Emma's college expenses. The benefits package included health insurance and a retirement plan. He would start the following Monday if he accepted. "I accept," Charles said without hesitation. "Thank you so much for this opportunity." After ending the call, Charles sat in his car for several minutes, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude. 7 months of unemployment were finally over. He had a job again, a purpose, a reason to get up in the morning. The weight that had been pressing down on his chest for months began to lift slightly. Charles drove straight to his mother's house to tell her the news in person. Margaret Thompson answered the door with surprise and delight. "Charles, what are you doing here? You look wonderful." "I got a job, Mom. I start Monday." His mother burst into tears and hugged him tightly. "Oh, honey, I'm so proud of you. I knew you could do it." They sat in the kitchen where Charles had eaten countless meals as a child, and he told his mother all about the interview process and the new job. Margaret listened with the focused attention she had always given to his childhood stories about school and friends. "Your father would be so proud," she said. "He always knew you were special, even when you were getting into trouble as a teenager." Charles felt emotions welling up that he had been suppressing for months. "Mom, I'm sorry I avoided your calls and pushed you away. I was ashamed of how I was handling everything." "You don't need to apologize for being human, Charles. Everyone goes through difficult times. What matters is that you found your way through it." That evening, Charles called Emma with the good news. She screamed with excitement when he told her about the job offer. "Dad, this is amazing. I can't wait to tell everyone at school. My dad got a new job." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Charles found himself laughing with genuine joy for the first time in months. "Maybe we can celebrate this weekend when you come visit. We could go out to dinner somewhere nice. Can we go to Romano's? They have that pasta dish you used to order for special occasions." Charles had not been to Romano's since before he lost his job. It was more expensive than the places he had been able to afford recently, but with his new salary, he could manage it. Absolutely. It's a date. Charles hesitated before making his next call, but he knew he needed to tell Sarah about the job. She deserved to know that his financial situation was improving, especially since it would affect child support and Emma's college funding. Sarah answered on the second ring. Hello, Charles. Sarah, I have some news I wanted to share with you. I got a job. There was a pause before Sarah responded. That's wonderful, Charles. Congratulations. I'm really happy for you. Her voice sounded warm, but cautious, like she was not sure how much enthusiasm to express. Charles understood her hesitation. His employment status had been a major factor in the breakdown of their marriage, but it was not the only issue they had faced. The salary is decent, Charles continued. I'll be able to start contributing to Emma's college expenses again, and I can increase the child support payments. That's great. Emma will be so relieved. She's been worrying about money more than a 17-year-old should have to. They talked for a few more minutes about practical matters related to Emma's care and their divorce proceedings. The conversation was civil but distant, lacking the warmth that had once characterized their relationship. Still, Charles was grateful that Sarah was willing to talk to him at all. Charles, Sarah said as they were about to hang up. Yeah, I really am happy about the job. I know how hard it's been for you to be unemployed. This is a big step forward. Charles felt tears threatening behind his eyes. Sarah's kindness, even after everything he had put her through, reminded him of why he had fallen in love with her in the first place. Thank you, Sarah. That means a lot coming from you. Charles's first day at Midwest Marketing Solutions went smoothly. Rebecca Chun introduced him to his coworkers and showed him to his desk in an open office environment that buzzed with productive energy. His job responsibilities included managing relationships with several local business clients and developing marketing strategies for their campaigns. The work felt familiar and engaging in a way Charles had forgotten was possible. He spent his first week learning about his assigned clients and studying their previous marketing efforts. His colleagues were friendly and helpful, treating him like a valued team member rather than the charity case he had started to think of himself as. Most importantly, having a structured schedule and meaningful work to do began to heal the psychological damage that months of aimless depression had caused. Charles started waking up with purpose again. He had somewhere to be, people counting on him, and projects to complete. The routine of professional life gave shape to his days and hope to his future. After his first paycheck, Charles moved out of his depressing studio apartment into a modest but comfortable one-bedroom place in a better neighborhood. He bought some basic furniture and tried to create a home that Emma would enjoy visiting. The new apartment had a separate bedroom, a real kitchen, and windows that actually let in natural light. Emma's next visit was a revelation. She walked through the new apartment with obvious approval, commenting on how much brighter and more welcoming it felt compared to his previous place. This actually feels like home, Dad. Not like the old house, but like a real place where someone lives instead of just exists. They cooked dinner together in the proper kitchen, and Charles was struck by how normal the evening felt. For the first time since their family had broken apart, he could envision a future where he and Emma had a healthy relationship, where she would want to spend time with him because she enjoyed his company rather than because she felt obligated. Dad, can I ask you something? Emma said as they were cleaning up after dinner. Of course. When you were unemployed, were you depressed? Like, actually clinically depressed? Charles considered how to answer his daughter's question honestly without burdening her with too much detail about his mental health struggles. Yes, I think I was. I felt hopeless and worthless for a long time. I stopped taking care of myself and pushed away the people who cared about me. Is that why you and Mom broke up? Because of the depression? That was part of it. But I also made some bad choices about how I handled our problems. I was angry and scared, and I took those feelings out on your mom instead of dealing with them in a healthy way. Emma nodded thoughtfully. I'm glad you're better now. You seem more like yourself again. Charles hugged his daughter, grateful for her forgiveness and acceptance. I'm working on being better. Some days are easier than others, but having you in my life gives me a reason to keep trying." As Emma's senior year progressed, Charles found himself becoming more involved in her college planning process. His improved financial situation meant that she could consider more expensive schools, though they were still being careful about costs. Charles helped her research scholarship opportunities and visited campuses with her on weekends. During one of these college visits, Emma brought up something that surprised Charles. "Dad, do you think you and Mom will ever get back together?" They were walking across the campus of State University, Emma's original dream school that was now back on her list of realistic options. Charles had been enjoying the tour and imagining his daughter as a college student, but Emma's question brought him back to the complicated reality of his personal life. "I don't know, sweetheart. That would be up to your mom as much as me. We'd both have to want to try, and we'd both have to be willing to work on the problems that led to our separation. Do you want to try?" Charles thought carefully before answering. "I miss our family the way it used to be. I miss being married to your mom. But I don't want to get back together just because it would be convenient or familiar. If we did try again, it would have to be because we both believe we could build something better than what we had before. Mom still loves you, you know. She tries to hide it, but I can tell." Charles felt his heart speed up at this information, but he tried not to read too much into it. "Love isn't always enough, Emma. Your mom and I would need to be able to trust each other and communicate better than we did before everything fell apart." That evening, alone in his apartment, Charles found himself thinking seriously about the possibility of reconciliation with Sarah for the first time since their separation. Having a stable job and a decent place to live had restored some of his confidence, but he knew that personal growth required more than just external circumstances. Charles decided to take a step he had been avoiding for months. He made an appointment with a therapist. Dr. Patricia Williams was a counselor who specialized in helping people deal with depression and relationship issues. Gloria from Fresh Start Career Services had recommended her, and Charles finally felt ready to address the emotional problems that had contributed to his life falling apart. "What brings you here today?" Dr. Williams asked during their first session. Charles told her about losing his job, his descent into depression, the breakdown of his marriage, and his recent progress toward rebuilding his life. Dr. Williams listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly letting Charles tell his story at his own pace. "It sounds like you've made significant positive changes in your life recently," Dr. Williams observed. "What made you decide to seek counseling now, when things are starting to improve?" "I realized that getting a job fixed my financial problems, but it didn't fix the emotional issues that made everything worse than it needed to be," Charles said. "I want to understand why I handled the crisis so badly, and I want to make sure I don't repeat the same mistakes if I face difficulties in the future." Over the following weeks, Charles began to understand patterns in his behavior that he had never recognized before. Dr. Williams helped him see how his pride and his need to be the provider had prevented him from accepting help when he needed it most. They talked about his tendency to internalize failure and his difficulty expressing vulnerability to the people who cared about him. Men in our culture are often taught that asking for help is a sign of weakness, Dr. Williams explained. But the reality is that being able to recognize when you need support and being willing to accept it is actually a sign of strength and wisdom. Charles also began to understand how his depression had affected his ability to be a good partner and father. When he was feeling hopeless about his own life, he had become unable to provide emotional support to Sarah and Emma. Instead of being a source of comfort during a difficult time, he had become an additional burden for his family to carry. "I pushed them away because I was ashamed," Charles admitted during one session. "I thought I was protecting them from my problems, but I was actually making their lives harder." "How do you think you might handle a similar crisis differently now?" Dr. Williams asked. Charles considered the question carefully. "I think I would try to talk about what I was feeling instead of keeping everything inside. I would ask for help sooner instead of waiting until things got desperate. And I would try to remember that my worth as a person isn't just based on my ability to provide financially for my family. These therapy sessions were difficult but helpful. Charles began to see himself more clearly, understanding both his strengths and his weaknesses in a way that felt honest rather than self-critical. He learned coping strategies for dealing with stress and depression, and he practiced expressing his emotions in healthy ways. As Christmas approached, Charles found himself in a position he had not expected to be in just a few months earlier. He had a job he enjoyed, a comfortable home, a good relationship with Emma, and a growing understanding of himself that gave him confidence about the future. He was not the same man he had been before losing his job, but he was becoming someone he could respect and like. Charles decided to take a chance on something that scared him. He called Sarah and asked if they could meet for coffee to talk. "I'm not trying to pressure you into anything," he said carefully. "I just feel like we left a lot of things unsaid when we separated, and I'd like a chance to have an honest conversation about where we both are now." Sarah was quiet for a long moment before responding. "I think that would be okay. But, Charles, I need you to understand that I'm not ready to talk about getting back together. I'm not sure I ever will be. I understand. I just want a chance to apologize properly and to let you know about some of the changes I've been making." They agreed to meet at a coffee shop near Sarah's apartment the following Saturday afternoon. Charles spent the week preparing for the conversation, working with Dr. Williams to identify the things he wanted to say and practicing how to express them clearly and honestly. The day of their meeting, Charles arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early and found a quiet table in the back corner. When Sarah walked in, his breath caught in his throat. She looked beautiful but tired, and there were lines around her eyes that had not been there when they were married. The stress of their separation had affected her too, though she had handled it with more grace than he had managed. "Hi, Charles," Sarah said, sitting down across from him. "You look good. Healthy. Thank you. So do you. How are you doing? How's work?" They spent the first few minutes catching up on safe topics. Emma's college applications, Sarah's job at the hospital, Charles's new position at Midwest Marketing Solutions. The conversation felt awkward at first, like they were strangers trying to find common ground. Finally, Charles gathered his courage and addressed the real reason for their meeting. "Sarah, I asked you to meet me because I owe you an apology that I never gave you properly. When I lost my job, I handled everything badly. I was depressed and scared, and instead of dealing with those feelings in a healthy way, I took them out on you and Emma. I pushed you away when I should have leaned on you for support. I made our crisis worse than it needed to be." Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression serious and attentive. "I've been seeing a therapist," Charles continued, "and I'm starting to understand why I reacted the way I did. That doesn't excuse my behavior, but it helps me see how I might handle things differently in the future." "I'm glad you're getting help," Sarah said softly. "I was worried about you for a long time. Even after I moved out, I was afraid you might do something to hurt yourself." "I thought about it sometimes," Charles admitted, "but I'm in a much better place now, both mentally and practically. The therapy is helping me understand myself better, and having a job again has given me back some confidence." They talked for over 2 hours, having the kind of honest conversation they had not managed to have during the crisis that ended their marriage. Sarah told Charles about how difficult it had been to watch him self-destruct while feeling helpless to save him. Charles explained how his pride and shame had prevented him from accepting the help she had tried to offer. "I still love you," Charles said as their conversation was winding down. "I know that might not matter anymore, and I'm not asking you to make any decisions about us right now. I just wanted you to know that losing you and Emma was the worst part of everything that happened to me." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I still love you too, Charles. But love wasn't enough to keep us together when you were in crisis. If we were ever going to try again, we'd need more than love. We'd need to be able to trust each other to handle problems as a team instead of falling apart individually. I understand, and I want you to know that I'm not expecting anything from you. I just hope that maybe we can be friends again, for Emma's sake and for our own sake. You were my best friend for 10 years, and I miss that as much as I miss being married to you." Sarah reached across the table and touched Charles's hand briefly. "I like that too. It might take time, but I think we can work toward being friends again. As Charles drove home from their meeting, he felt a mixture of hope and sadness. Sarah's willingness to have an honest conversation with him felt like a gift, even though she had made it clear that reconciliation was not guaranteed. For the first time in months, Charles could imagine a future where he and Sarah could co-parent Emma successfully and maybe even enjoy each other's company again. That night, Charles called Emma to tell her about his conversation with her mother. "How did it go?" Emma asked eagerly. "It went well. We were able to talk honestly about what happened between us, and I think we understand each other better now. We're going to try to be friends again." "Does that mean you might get back together?" "I don't know, sweetheart. That's something your mom and I would have to figure out slowly over time. But even if we don't get back together as a couple, I think we can have a better relationship as your parents and as people who care about each other." Emma seemed satisfied with this answer, and Charles realized that his daughter had probably given up hoping for a fairy tale reunion between her parents. She just wanted her family to find a way to be healthy and happy, whatever form that took. As Charles prepared for bed that night, he looked at himself in the bathroom mirror for the first time in months without feeling ashamed. The man looking back at him was not the same person who had whispered, "I've lost everyone," to his reflection months earlier. This person had been through a crisis and had come out stronger on the other side. He had learned to ask for help when he needed it, to be honest about his emotions, and to take responsibility for his mistakes without being destroyed by them. Charles had not gotten his old life back, but he was building a new life that felt authentic and sustainable. He had a job that challenged him, a relationship with his daughter that was growing stronger, and the beginning of a friendship with his ex-wife that might someday become something more. Most importantly, Charles had learned to like himself again. The journey from rock bottom to recovery had been longer and more difficult than he had ever imagined, but it had taught him things about resilience and growth that he could never have learned any other way. Looking in the mirror, Charles smiled at his reflection. "I haven't lost everyone," he said quietly, "and I haven't lost myself either." 6 months later, Charles stood in the parking lot of State University, watching Emma carry boxes into her dormitory. The spring sunshine felt warm on his face, and the campus was alive with the energy of new students beginning their college journeys. Charles felt a mixture of pride and nostalgia as he watched his daughter take this important step toward independence. "Dad, can you help me with this one? It's really heavy," Emma called from the back of his car. Charles lifted the box, which contained her computer and textbooks, and followed Emma up the stairs to her third-floor room. Her roommate had not arrived yet, so they had the space to themselves while they unpacked her belongings and set up her side of the room. "I can't believe I'm actually here," Emma said, hanging clothes in her closet. "A year ago, I didn't think I'd be able to afford State University. You earned this, kiddo. Your grades, your part-time job, your scholarships. You made this happen." Emma had received a partial academic scholarship that covered about 40% of her tuition. Between Charles's contribution, Sarah's savings, and Emma's own earnings from working at the restaurant, they had managed to make the finances work without taking on crushing debt. As they worked together to make Emma's dorm room feel like home, Charles reflected on how much had changed since the dark days when he had lost his job and his family had fallen apart. The man he was now felt connected to the man he had been before the crisis, but also fundamentally different in ways that he valued. "Mom should be here soon with the rest of my stuff," Emma said, checking her phone. "Are you going to be okay seeing her? I mean, you guys have been getting along better, but this is still kind of big day." Charles and Sarah had been rebuilding their friendship slowly over the past 6 months. They had coffee together once a month to discuss Emma's college planning and other family matters. Their conversations were warm but careful, both of them aware that they were walking on new ground after the earthquake that had destroyed their marriage. "I'll be fine," Charles assured his daughter. "Your mom and I want to be here for you together. This is about you, not about our complicated history." Sarah arrived an hour later with Charles's mother in tow. Margaret Thompson had insisted on coming to see her granddaughter off to college, and Sarah had offered to drive her since Charles's car was already packed with Emma's belongings. "Oh, sweetheart, look at this beautiful room," Margaret exclaimed, hugging Emma tightly. "You're going to have such wonderful experiences here." The four of them worked together to finish setting up Emma's space, hanging pictures and arranging furniture until the room looked welcoming and personal. Charles found himself enjoying the family atmosphere, even though the family looked different than it had a year earlier. During a quiet moment, Sarah approached him while Emma was showing Margaret the campus map. "She looks happy," Sarah observed. "Really excited about being here." "She does. I think we did something right with her, despite all our mistakes." Sarah smiled, and for a moment, Charles caught a glimpse of the woman he had fallen in love with years earlier. "We did do something right. She's turning into an amazing young woman." "Sarah, I want to thank you for making this day about Emma instead of about our issues. I know it's probably weird for you to be here with me." "It's not weird," Sarah said. "It feels right, actually. Whatever happened between us, we're still Emma's parents. We'll always be connected through her." When it came time to say goodbye, Emma hugged each of them individually, then surprised them by asking for a group picture with all four generations of her family. "I want to remember this day exactly as it is," she said, setting up the camera timer on her phone. Looking at the photo later, Charles was struck by how natural they all looked together despite the complex history between them. Emma stood in the center, flanked by her parents, with her grandmother's hand resting lovingly on her shoulder. They looked like a family that had been through difficulties, but had found a way to support each other through them. The drive back home was quieter than the drive to Campus High.